You are Locked On College Basketball, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Andy, throughout the weekend, we typically have a whole host of great games, but the bubble situation was all fixated on Saturday. Wasn't really anything on Friday, wasn't really anything yesterday on Sunday, but boy, did we have a bubblicious slate throughout the day Saturday, starting at noon Eastern and all the way until my eyes closed themselves, even as I needed some clothespins or something to keep them going. Andy, we got a little bit of a host of some winners and losers here. Let's start with the teams that helped themselves out on Saturday. What you got?
Yeah, Xavier, I think, was probably the biggest winner here. They got a nice win over Creighton, and we kind of knew this was one of the better opportunities presenting itself to a bubble team. I think that's always a big part of the equation. Is in a lot of cases, bubble teams really just have games where they can't lose. You know, like North Carolina, for example, is a bubble winner because they did not lose to Miami, but it's not like the win against Miami dramatically altered North Carolina's resume. Whereas for Xavier, this is a nice win over Creighton. Now it's a quad 2 win, unfortunately, so they still only have the one quad 1 win, and that is a pretty dangerous number when you're trying to be an at-large in at-large consideration to only have that one quad 1 win. But for Xavier, really nice win over Creighton. Vandy is a team that I think is already pretty safely in the field. I don't know that they were as much in that bubble conversation, but if you wanted to cement yourself in the field of 68 without having to even worry about it for the rest of the season, go out and get a win over Mizzou. And that is what they were able to do. Shout out Mark Byington and Vandy. Dennis Gates and Mizzou forgot that you're supposed to foul when you're up 3. They'd been able to do that. They might have been able to pull off the W here. Obviously, Mizzou in a very comfortable spot themselves, but Vandy did some really great work here to secure their spot. Boise State, similar to the North Carolina situation, Boise State just could not screw around with Fresno State, the worst team in the Mountain West. And honestly, they did. They screwed around with them for a long time, nearly had what would have been a catastrophic loss for Leon Rice and the Broncos, but they pulled it out. A win is a win. They stay in a comfortable spot because they did not lose. North Carolina, far less mystery. They went out and took care of business against a very bad Miami team. Carolina had been playing some good basketball as of late, coming into that big-time matchup to close out the regular season against Duke. And then we talked about this with Georgia playing Texas. It was a double bubble game. Whichever team won that game was going to be in a far more comfortable position on the correct side of the bubble. Georgia takes care of business. Really nice win for them. Really ugly performance for Texas in this one. They are on our loser list, of course, but Georgia, nice job by Mike White, Asa Newell, and company to get a W here.
Andy, one of the things, talking about Boise State is that some of their metrics are looking pretty strong, but one of their issues right now is they've got 3 different losses outside of quad 1. They've got a quad 2 loss and 2 different quad 3 losses, BC and Wazoo on a neutral floor. And so Boise State really trying to overcome that right now. Andy, I did a good bit of looking around on Sunday. You and I were talking about this before we started recording at various resumes and data points. And one of the hard things for the selection committee is, man, the bubble is full of undeserving teams, as it always is. Yeah. And it's like, what are the things that are really going to sell it? Is it being high? We've added in some new predictive metrics to the team sheets this year. Are they going to value that? Are they going to value not losing outside of quad 1? Are they going to value more non-con strength? It's just so hard to know. And I feel like, if I compare Boise State and Xavier, right, it's like, well, Boise State has more quad 1 wins, but Xavier doesn't have any losses outside of quad 2, while Boise State has 2. It's just all these little nitpicky things, man. I'm really intrigued what the selection committee chair, A.D. Bubba Cunningham from North Carolina, and his committee are going to do. It's going to be very interesting. Andy, a quick honorable mention in the winners side of things, Colorado State is just squeaking into this conversation, right? We want to just mention that and say it. And by the way, they thrashed Utah State 93-66 on Saturday. Still a little bit outside-y looking in, but I think they do deserve a look, Andy. Like, let's not look at them with binoculars. Maybe we just get a little looking glass or something. By the way, Utah State, I feel like they're comfortable, Andy, but they can't be messing around down the stretch here. Got a very winnable game to close things out. And then you got a couple other schools that, as you said, with Vandy, not really all that bubbly, but Baylor had slipped back onto the bubble a little bit. They got to win this weekend, and so we had some others like that as well. Let's flip things where we had a couple egg layers, Andy, I'm calling them, on the loser side. You already mentioned Texas just getting blitzed at home by Georgia. Not good. They've got 3 straight losses now. They've lost 6 of 7 and 7 of their last 9, Andy. It's really kind of tumbling for Rodney Terry's team. Speaking of which, you and I were pretty convinced after that first year that Rodney Terry finished out that he was good to go. Andy, I'm concerned.
Yeah.
I'll say that right now. Arkansas had a massive bubble. They were in our bubble winners category last year.
Yeah.
Or last week, excuse me. And then they go out and do this weekend. I mean, losing at South Carolina was a big fat ouch. And Andy, they didn't just lose at South Carolina. This was an embarrassing loss. 14 points at the half. Am I remembering that correctly?
Yeah, something like that. It was atrocious. Yeah.
Good grief.
Yeah.
Anyway, saw egg layer. The thing that we've got to do, though, folks, is not be completely reactionary. This time of year, it's so easy to think, oh, this massive loss at South Carolina. Well, it's a quad 2 loss, Andy, right? And so it's just a data point on their entire season. So that's what we got to be able to zoom out and do in that way. Oklahoma, Andy, they're in an interesting spot right now because they've had back-to-back losses this week, but it's by 4 combined points. Yeah. They lost at home to Kentucky with Otega Owe going off and that flip over his head as the game winner. Like, they are that shot away from not winning that game. And then this loss this weekend is tough again. Like, I thought they were in good shape at Ole Miss. They had come back and just things went the wrong way at the very last second there. And so when you come into those 2 games already 4-10 in the SEC, there's no room for moral victories, Andy. And the problem for the Sooners is not only is that now 2 straight, but they've lost 7 of 8 and 8 of 10.
Yeah, Oklahoma
different. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, I mean, Oklahoma's, it's somewhat similar to what happened last year, their final year in the Big 12, where they had such a strong non-conference and just did not do well enough in the conference. And this year, while that narrative is kind of similar, the fact that the SEC is so good is kind of helping Oklahoma, a team that has, more quad 1 wins than probably anybody else on the bubble, or at least among the most of any bubble team at this point. They had a strong non-conference. I mean, they beat Arizona and Louisville, were fantastic wins for them. They beat Michigan in December. Like, this team has really good wins, but their conference resume is just not great. I mean, they only have 4 wins in the conference, and their wins are home against South Carolina, road against Arkansas, fine, home against Vanderbilt, fine, home against Mississippi State. Like, okay, those are decent wins, but nothing great. And they only have 2 games left, and it's home against Missouri, which would be a nice win if they were to get that, but a potentially bad loss is a home game. And then they're at Texas, another bubble team, kind of a little bit farther off the bubble at this point for Texas, but it's for Oklahoma. And I don't think you can lose either of those games. I think you have to win both of them. And I think if you, even if you win both of them, you're still 6-12 in the conference. You still don't really have any great conference wins. Like, they're still going to be in kind of a tricky spot. So very interested to see what happens with Porter Moser's team.
Yeah. Cause they're not, it's like they were undefeated in non-con, but their strength of schedule was abysmal, Andy. It's like the whole Big 12 thing from last year. Anyway, keep going. Sorry.
Yeah, absolutely. Other bubble teams that did not have good weekends. Nebraska lost at home to Minnesota. That's 3 straight losses for Fred Hoiberg's team. They've now lost 4 of their last 5 games. It's hard to. Again, you want to look at the whole season. You don't want to just look, kind of narrowly focused. I know that the committee in the past has really put a strong emphasis on like Final 10. And I know they've kind of gone away from doing that, but I do wonder if, it's human nature to look at how a team's doing towards the end of the year. It's just recency bias, and Nebraska hasn't looked great. And so they're in a tough spot right now. And then SMU, a team that has kind of just been floating around this conversation by virtue of just not really having a great resume, but having a resume that's good enough. And they don't really have a lot of quad 1 wins, but they don't have a lot of bad losses, but they go out and lose at Stanford. And we kind of wondered if this might happen. Those road trips out west are tough. Obviously, SMU is going about half as far as most of the rest of the teams in the ACC, but it's still tough to go out there, and Stanford gets a W there. And I think that's a bad enough loss for SMU that I think it's going to take some serious work in the ACC tournament to get them back on the correct side of the bubble here. And then an honorable mention in the bad category, San Francisco, a team that wasn't really on the bubble, but it was like, hey, if you beat Gonzaga, on Saturday, you might then be on the bubble. And they did not. They got beat by 20 by the Zags, who have now cemented their spot in the NCAA tournament by beating both Santa Clara and San Francisco this past week. I think Gonzaga not only put themselves firmly in the field, but I think they made sure both those teams are not going to be in the field after beating them this past week.
Yeah, Andy, I mean, again, we're talking about all these. What do you look at on the resume with Nebraska? 5-9 in quad 1. They got 1 quad 2 loss, but they got 2 quad 3 losses, right? Home to USC, home to Minnesota. So that loss this weekend is really bad for them. They've dropped to 57th in the net. As for SMU, if we're talking about Xavier and North Carolina as each having 1 quad 1 win and that being a disqualifier, well, the Mustangs got a big goose egg. 0 quad 1 wins. They're 0-5. They're 5-3, so they got 3 quad 2 losses, and they don't have any losses outside of that. And so it's so hard to know what to make of these teams.